Hey y'all, it is Pax. What is up? It is another late night in the editing room, also known as my bedroom, with my clothes that I refuse to pick up, Marshmallow, my Dungeons & Dragons books, the episode that you're about to watch. But we normally have a highlight at the start of every episode, but I need to issue a direct plea to you, because this episode is all highlight, which is why I wanted to make a video directly letting you know that this week's guest is a super special guest, Dr. Nona Carter, an expert in modern Japanese literature, but someone who also spent time growing up in Japan, went back as an adult, has amazing scholarly opinions on why Japan is the first post-apocalyptic society, as well as the only one in the world. Why Akira did change not just animation in the East, but animation in the West as well. And why really, if you're a fan of anime, or if you are a fan of film in general, you cannot get by without knowing your stuff when it comes to this. The most foundational, the most meticulously composed, devastating, emotionally complex and rich film that there is out there. I encourage you to watch this one in full. Without further ado, featuring Dr. Nona Carter, here is our long-awaited episode on Akira. Hello everybody, I'm Pax.
And I'm Hal.
And this is Brotakus, the show where two guys who love anime do a deep dive into what is and isn't worth watching. We believe you don't need a major in anime studies to enjoy this wild, beautiful, and strange art form, and we are lucky to have you on this journey with us. Now, there is no Brotakus News Corner this week because we have a very special guest. Now, traditionally, Brotakus is a show where we say you don't need a major in anime studies to enjoy it, and that's very true. But our guest this week is someone very special. As a child, Dr. Nona Carter became the first foreigner to attend a public school in Hiroshima, and that connection to Japan found her returning for college at Nanzan University, where she received a major in Asian Studies and went on to graduate school for her PhD in Asian Studies with a specialty in modern Japanese literature. No, I don't mean modern Japanese light novels that you degenerate otaku may be familiar with, like So I'm a Spider, So What? Or The Villainous Noble Girl Wants to Slim Down Her Husband. I mean modern masterpieces from Mishima Yukio and Oe Kenzaburo. Nona, did I get those names right?
Oe Kenzaburo.
Oe Kenzaburo. Is that better?
Go.
And just so you know, everyone, that's how today's episode is going to go. For the majority of the time, we will be fact-checking. So don't worry.
It's going to go, Hal and Pack say something really wrong.
Really wrong.
Dr. Carter's
and then we're going to get back on track.
Guys, hey, actually. And so Dr. Nona Carter is currently teaching a course on anime at the University of Buffalo. And a huge shout out to the Asian Studies program at UB for making this possible. Nona is absolutely brilliant, and we are so lucky to have her. We bring you the real anime professor, Dr. Nona Carter. Nona, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for that introduction. I think brilliant might be a little bit of an overstatement, but they do pay me to teach anime.
I do think you're very brilliant, Nona, because from our previous conversation, one, you pronounce it anime, which sounds like the smart, better, right way to pronounce it, unlike animu or anime. And the amount of kind of just knowledge and life perspective that you brought to our previous conversation was really fantastic. And starting off the show today, we kind of want to open a window to our audience into the life and influences of Dr. Carter, the things that you had talked with us about. Could you tell us a little bit about your time growing up in Hiroshima or spending a few years there? How did that come to be?
So my dad actually did research through RERF, which is Radiation Effects Research Foundation. It's a joint U.S. and Japanese government initiative to study the radiation effects of atomic bomb survivors. And so that's how we ended up in Hiroshima. And I went to the international school. Everybody in Hiroshima in the early 1990s, all the foreigners went to the international school. But I just didn't, I don't know, maybe I didn't fit in. I'm not really sure how to say it, but
you weren't like other girls.
I saw the Japanese. I guess not. And I saw the Japanese kids walking home from school, and they had the bright red Nandoseru backpacks, and they were wearing their uniforms, and they looked so happy and carefree. And I just wanted to be with them instead. And so I asked my mom if I could go to a Japanese elementary school. And she said, I'm not really sure. So they hired a translator and they went, and we spoke no Japanese at the time. Not a word. And they said, well, I guess there's no law against it. And so I ended up going to this Japanese school, and I was the first foreigner in Hiroshima to do so. And it was an amazing, life-changing experience. I showed up on my first day with just a dictionary. And kids, when I walked onto the school grounds for the first time, kids swarmed me and started touching my hair and petting me and shouting words that they thought were English at me. It was just completely a new experience. I was definitely an oddity.
Well, and so this is only really hitting me home now as you're telling me this, but like, I'm trying to put myself in that situation where going to the international school and having the teenagers with the Backstreet Boys posters and, finding that distasteful. But like the idea and the kind of like confidence or spirit that it takes to decide to go to the local school, that is actually really remarkable.
So cool.
Because I think I would be really scared. What was it about your disposition when you were young that, were you worried about this, or it was just an idea you followed through on?
I just wanted to be with those kids, and I wasn't really a very anxious child. And so I just decided that that's what I wanted and asked the question. And then really it was my mom who pursued it by hiring the translator and figuring it all out, the logistics. But there's just something that really drew me to Japan is a very, very wonderful place for children. It's safe. And there's very much a mentality of protecting children, even when they're not your own children. So I guess in my own childlike way, I sensed that, and I wanted to be part of that community.
Very interesting. And so your time in the school, I remember you telling me that this school is now a historical landmark, or like a museum?
Yeah. So now it's no longer a school. It was a school in 1945 when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And it happened to be the school that is closest to the epicenter of the atomic bomb. And so when I went there, it was still a school, but now it's been turned into a museum. When I was there, you could actually see white shadows on the walls in the basement of the imprint. The blast was so bright that you would, some people who were very close to the epicenter would leave a white shadow imprint and then just disintegrate or melt on the spot. But in my school, there was a white shadow imprint of a bunny that was hopping in midair when the bomb was dropped, and you could still see that.
That is such a devastating detail.
There was writing on the walls of the teachers who were writing when it happened, and you see the writing just trail off. It was a very historic school to end up at, and totally by coincidence. I was zoned for that school. It wasn't by choice, but yeah.
And what do you think some of the ways that the school went on to shape you would be? Because that's a totally different environment than going to a modern American school and having your Lunchables and playing Yu-Gi-Oh at the lunch table. What was that like for you?
Well, it was the best of times and the worst of times. I made lifelong friends. I experienced a new culture. I learned a new language. I was taken out of any kind of American school, normal school for an American for 3 whole years. So when I came back to the U.S., I came back in the middle of middle school. That's a brutal time to be the new kid. And not only the new kid, but the new kid who is culturally different than the other kids. I consider myself pretty bicultural. And so that transition was actually pretty rough. And in some ways, it was rougher coming back to the U.S. as a 7th grader than it was going to Japan and having people pet me like a dog because I had curly hair. So in some ways, that was the bigger transition.
Yeah. Hal, you look like you got something brewing.
I can't help but I see something unfolding. And Nona, I would love it if you would take this as a compliment. As I am hearing your story and as I am watching it sort of unfold in the story that you're telling me, I can't help but think like, I think I need to call Hayao Miyazaki and just have him like start writing a new script.
Please.
Because I keep Goro far away from that.
Keep Goro away.
Goro needs to wait outside while Hayao's writing this. But like, just I think that is such an amazing, incredible story to tell. And I just can't help but think like, wow, this is what like the protag in a Miyazaki film experiences. This is like, it's got morals, it's got incredible new stories, it's got vibrant characters and a new world. Strong female protagonist. It's got everything. It's all of it. I think you're the new Miyazaki protag.
Well, if I get to meet Miyazaki through this deal, I'm all for it. I would love that.
Great. I have him on speed dial. I'll make sure I text him after the recording.
We'll have our people reach out.
Yeah.
A detail that I thought was so interesting that I just kind of wanted to share with the audience was that, could you tell us a little bit about the Hiroshima dialect in particular? Because that was such an interesting detail.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I learned Japanese the way kids learn a language, not through studying grammar and memorizing kanji. Well, I did memorize kanji, but not through studying the grammar and the standard Tokyo dialect, the NHK dialect that we learn in college textbooks here. I actually learned it through speaking to my friends and trying to be cool like the other kids. And so I learned a Hiroshima dialect. And there's no really good equivalent that I can tell you, but the best thing, analogy I can think of is if you saw a Japanese person speaking in a really thick Southern accent, like y'all and eating grits, that kind of thing. That is the closest I can come to explaining how odd I was. And so when after about a year of being at the school, I started to learn the language and speak, and my friends and I would go out, to the Hondori or go to an amusement park, and we'd be talking to each other, and people would stop and stare and just guffaw. They would laugh so hard. I was the laughing stock of Hiroshima because people heard me speaking in this super, super country bumpkin accent that very few Americans at the time lived in Hiroshima. And if they did, they learned standard Japanese. So to hear a little kid just going on and on about things in Hiroshima dialect was pretty funny. Yeah.
That is so adorable. And that opened a whole new world to me because people always, a common anime trope is the character who is from Hiroshima or from like the boonies in Japan who in the dub they will portray that person as just kind of like talking like this, or like even in another case kind of just adding a Cajun kind of gumbo accent to it. And the whole time they're like, I don't understand what you're saying, dude. What's up with your accent? But an interesting thing is that in America these kind of like there are more accents than dialects, but right. Hiroshima is. Can you explain to the audience kind of like what the difference is between like the barely standardized Japanese dialects at this point?
Right. So it's a little bit more dramatic than the example I gave of a Japanese person speaking with a Southern accent, because other than a few words that are more Southern words, the words that we speak are pretty much the same in all the different accents of American English, at least. But in Japan, a dialect is, for the most part, you can understand somebody speaking a different dialect, but they do use different words. So it's not just an accent, but it's different. So for example, nani o shiteimasu ka is, what are you doing? Okay, in standard, that's what you would learn in a textbook. And in Hiroshima, we would say nani shioru. So other than the nani, which means what, it's totally different. Right. And somebody in Tokyo may or may not understand you, but it would definitely be a challenge.
Yeah, you would say that and they'd be like,
yeah, definitely a challenge to understand.
Now, going onward to kind of pursuing this as a passion in university, specifically the focus on Japanese literature, I've only read a few of these kind of like, I guess the books I've read were mostly kind of like surrealist, like with like magical realism elements and some really like melancholy Japanese novels. But what would you say like defines the Japanese literature scene, or at least their greats, in a way that's different than like a Dostoevsky or a Hemingway?
That's a really good question. So my focus is on modern literature, and my main area of research and interest is wartime and post-war Japan. So that ends, there's no clear date where that ends, but it basically up maybe through the 60s is kind of from 1945 to 1960 is kind of my very narrow scope of what I love and what draws me to Japanese literature. And during that time, they had a genre of literature called nikutai bungaku, and it means flesh literature. And so during wartime, there were very, very strict censors on pretty much everything, but including any kind of sensualism, sex, anything like that. And so when the U.S. came and occupied Japan, we also had censorship of Japanese literature, but it was all political censorship. So all of that other type of censorship was all of a sudden lifted. And so you have this outburst of what they call flesh literature, which is extremely grotesque, extremely embedded into the body and flesh and rotting flesh and sensual flesh and everything that was banned during the war. So that you just have this explosion of that type of literature in Japan. That's not my specific specialty, but if you're asking me one type of genre, that's the first that comes to mind.
So when you said flesh literature, the first thing that came to mind was, I don't know if you're familiar, the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead. That is the first thing that came to my mind. But what I'm understanding it to be is just something a little more risque rather than, evil.
I wouldn't say evil. I think one of the things that really draws me to Japanese literature is that there's not a good and an evil. You can't really speak in those terms. So
Sure.
Definitely, I wouldn't say evil, but definitely risque. And even literature that doesn't belong solidly in the nikutai bungaku, the flesh literature genre, we do see a lot of like Oi Kenzaburo is my absolute favorite post-war Japanese author. And even he's not a flesh literature author, but you can definitely see like this kind of the body, and it's grotesque in a very specific way and super, super interesting. You also see a lot of struggling with identity, a national identity. Obviously, Japan had built their identity on this militaristic notion of we are a descendant of the emperor, we're fighting a holy war, extremely militaristic, everyone die for the emperor type mentality, and then that shattered. That shattered in two flashes of light, that shattered. And so, of course, they have to rebuild their identity while being occupied by their former enemy. So that's a very tricky situation to be in, and you see that reflected in the post-war literature as well.
Yeah. Have you seen a movie called Tetsuo the Iron Man?
No, I have not.
Okay, because this was something where this hit me when I was way too young. I was like 9, and my cousin had a weird boyfriend who was the first one who showed me Princess Mononoke, so probably set me down on this path because that was my first movie.
Okay.
But also showed me Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is one of these like 80s Japanese cyberpunk body horror films about a salaryman who's has this obsession with iron and slowly starts replacing parts of himself Ship-of-Theseus style until he's just a full undying metal homunculus at the end. And there's this whole genre of like body horror in Japanese films as well at that time, as they were kind of exploring that. And I'm kind of curious, you were talking about the cultural identity and like the almost supplanting of flesh with technology and metal in the post-war boom. What's your sense of the kind of like psychology or zeitgeist that leads to these themes being explored? What were some of the things kind of like going on in the Japanese consciousness that led to this topic being explored?
Well, whether it's the consciousness or the subconsciousness, I can't really be sure without asking the director, but I think definitely in Akira, but also in a lot of other films, you can see this. So Japan is is the only post-apocalyptic society, right? And I think we'll get to that later when we talk about Akira. But so you have that, and then you also have in the post-war period, Japan completely changes its national identity and modernizes, and the economy and technology grow at the most rapid rate of any country in the world. It's unprecedented how fast Japan went from basically a completely decimated third world country to Japan in the 80s. That happened over a course of about 35 years. That's pretty amazing. And so we see in a lot of films, and I think my students are probably getting sick of me pointing this out because I point it out in pretty much every film we watch in my class. But we see the impact of that rapid modernization, definitely in Akira, but also in films like Ghost in the Shell. What you just mentioned is so reminiscent of Ghost in the Shell, of the human body turning to a machine, basically. And that question of at what point are you no longer human is very reminiscent of Ghost in the Shell. I'd be curious to know which came first, but...
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as I'm thinking about like the West is kind of so centralized on this like almost like a core egotistical element of our literature about, you know, who am I, what can I become, how can I become great, whether we're talking about Gatsby or we're talking about any number of Hemingway novels, kind of just the central importance of it. So to have almost this dissociation and like depersonalization present in this, I think it definitely speaks to the loss of identity. And I think that Nona was just doing our job for us when you were mentioning Akira, which is a great segue, right?
Absolutely.
And so Hal, you take the reins. I'm tossing the ball your way.
Thank you. I'm catching it. I got it. So for those of you watching / listening, that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the iconic film, one that influenced both Eastern films and Western later. Akira.
10 years old in a hoe with a box. I saw the ad in a copy of Vox. Red motorbike and a red leather jacket. It spoke to my soul, I knew I must have it. AKA symmetry oneness, perfect name for his doneness. AKA symmetry oneness, perfect name for his doneness. I cut the ad from the copy of Vox. I watched the film on a little black box. Goggle my eyes, split my mind away. It elocuted what I still can't say. So I scratched in the streets, then I scrapped with police, then I scratched it for peace, that's sweet. Yeah, scratched in the streets, then I scrapped with police, then I scratched it for peace, that's a bad better race.
And let me tell you, it is a wild ride, and it's really gonna wrap together all these themes of quick modernization, post-apocalyptic warscapes, you know, and just the landscape of Japan, what it is, what it's become. And I can't wait to talk about Akira.
Absolutely. And this is the release of Akira, I don't think it's even debatable that it's the most important event in anime ever, in all of Japanese animation. Not only was it the thing that almost single-handedly led to a distribution company finding success in the West and starting to disseminate more Japanese films, but it was like the culmination of like these 80s era like ultra-violence and experimentation in anime that you were seeing with things like Fist of the North Star, the things that were finally going away from early animation that almost looked like Hanna-Barbera, going into Astro Boy as identity starts getting established. And this is one of the strongest and I think probably most like unimpeachable artistic statements that I've seen in my life. And so with that, we are going to do a bit of a game where Hal and I loosely and incorrectly recap the loose plot of Akira, and Nona step in and stop us when we start feeding lies to the audience, okay?
All right. Are we doing with this a time limit, or are we just going to go for it?
We're just going to go for it, but we're gonna sprint through it.
All right, ready? Can I start?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, so you start.
Akira. The scene is Tokyo. It is year in the 1900s. It is late 1900s.
Immediately wrong. It's 2019.
It is 2019. No. That's Neo Tokyo, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So guess what, Pax?
We
start in Japan. Right before World War III happens, and you see an enormous singularity suddenly wipe out Japan, and you're like, oh god, those people probably aren't okay. And so boom, flash forward, it is now 2019 in Neo Tokyo, 33 years after the events of World War III, and Japan is now a post-apocalyptic warscape. So very, very cyberpunk, just without all like the weird Bethesda like gaming glitches. And you are introduced to the main characters, Kaneda, Tetsuo, and the rest of the biker gang. They're a bunch of bikers. They're going around fighting clowns, not real clowns. They're a gang called the Clowns.
Clown posse.
They're fighting the Joker with Batman.
It's right there.
They're right there. And so you're introduced to the idea that there is a lot of civil unrest in Neo-Tokyo. There are a lot of protesters going around, like raising the city, while the military police tries to come in and stop them. And you get this weird idea of like, ooh, I don't know who's actually right here. You're like, okay, seems like everyone has a lot of reasons to be upset, and the police are they're like beating people in the streets, shooting off tear gas. Things are bad. And then suddenly, there's a weird little child here, and he looks like he's been drained out, like his soul out of his mouth, like Harry Potter
old
and
man
Prisoner of
standing
Azkaban.
in the streets.
Yeah, like a Dementor got to him like 5 minutes before the scene.
Yeah.
Super disturbing.
Yes.
The first time I watched it was super disturbing.
I was like, that's a grown man, but is it? And it was.
Small grown man.
And so you're introduced to them. One of the characters, Tetsuo, accidentally hits the kid with his bike in this altercation with this other gang, but suddenly, an invisible wall. He's psychic? Oh, maybe. Anyway, Pax, take it away.
Yeah, and so as this is happening, suddenly, as they hit Baby Grandpa, Tetsuo is like flung off the bike, and a bunch of government people come into the shops and like, get the Baby Grandpa, there's a threat happening to Baby Grandpa, we gotta capture Baby Grandpa. And they all jump out of the helicopters, pick Baby Grandpa up, and while they're at it, they pick up the homie that slammed his bike into Baby Grandpa.
Yeah, poor Tetsuo's on the ground like, ow, oh my god, he's very uncomfortable.
Whereas the rest of the bikers are on their way trying to intervene, and they've just, popped Xannies after killing the insane clown posse and killing Crazy Jay, and they are too late, as Tetsuo is whisked away. And the kind of taking the long thing of it, so we're not too beat by beat, kind of like breaking it down, you discover that Baby Grandpa has psychic powers. And there are several other Baby Grandpas, and a Baby Grandma, and one Baby Grandma is in a psychic floating wheelchair. And these are all a long procession of sort of psychic experiments to unlock the latent psionic human potential in these folks, and they're kind of being experimented and fed substances and tested in a way that Kanye West's entire Stronger music video is a full Akira ripoff.
Yes.
And so eventually they discover that not only does Tetsuo kind of have these latent psychic abilities, but that he is the chosen one. I mean, he has super latent psychic abilities. And through a bunch of horrendous kind of like nightmare escapes and strange encounters with the Baby Grandpas, he unlocks more and more of his psychic energy, and you start hearing the whispers of someone who had similar psychic powers called Akira. Hal, take it from here.
Right, and everyone's like, you hear the name Akira throughout the film, like not from like Kaneda, who's like the biker friend who doesn't have any powers, but like he's super funny and that's his bit. You hear like
somehow at the end he has like a one-on-one bazooka battle. Despite
he's
just
like
being a kid.
But anyway.
Sorry.
So we get like government officials. We got like a colonel who's supposedly in charge of the whole military operation in Neo-Tokyo, and everyone's like, hey, what about Akira? Has anyone heard about Akira? And he's like, nope, I haven't said a word. No, lips are sealed. Akira doesn't exist. Not a thing. And
fake news. I've never heard of Akira. No one's
Akira,
ever heard of
never
it.
met her.
What? There's no Akira.
So Tetsuo starts having images. He's like, oh my god, Akira, who is that? I gotta go find him. And so essentially Tetsuo, his psychic abilities blow up. He mulches some people, and he walks into a room, and I mean mulches, I mean literally like disintegrates them like a water balloon. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Goes in and he meets the Baby Grandpas again, and they accidentally tell him, hey, this is where Akira was or is, we don't know. And he's just like, okay, cool. And then he flies away because he can do that all of a sudden. And then he finds Akira as Kaneda.
The Baby Grandpas try to stop him, but they have like too much arthritis. Yeah, he kind of has like a brief psychic battle.
They kind of like instigate the situation. But then they're like, oh, I think we goofed. I think we messed up.
It was just a prank, bro. Don't unlock Akira and destroy the city. Don't do it. And then he's like, too bad.
Yeah, you have this idea. Everyone, like the Colonel and the Baby Grandpas all have this idea like, oh, he's going to go wake up Akira. And if he does that, he's going to blow up Tokyo again. And you're like,
pause, halfway point. Nona, have we gotten anything super wrong?
Well, the Baby Grandpas are called ESPers. The ESPers.
Okay.
Yeah,
ESP.
The ESP and the ESPers. But yeah, I think Baby Grandpa's a better word, actually. That's what they look like. So I like your analysis better. It's much better than ESPers.
Okay, great. We're gonna stick with Baby Grandpas.
We'll get those on t-shirts along with the really cool red jackets that they have with the pill on the back that says,
yes.
What is it? It says like good for health, bad for education, I think. Like
capsules.
The fashion of the show is so cool.
I don't know. There's like graffiti all over the walls of Neo Tokyo that are like summer in Japanese, summer in English. So I'll be like, oh, Japanese. Oh, that's enough bomb in English. Oh, okay. So like, which is funny. But anyway, Tetsuo flies out. Canada goes out, tries to stop him because Tetsuo's now going around and murdering people with the psychic powers because he's a depressed boy. He's got a lot of like repressed rage inside him, and suddenly he has the power of a god, and he can do anything he wants with it. So he goes.
He's just like full Joaquin Phoenix Joker. Just
like I don't care, blowing people up. The army tries to stop him. They can't, and then there's a fight between Canada and Tetsuo. Anyway, long story short, I won't tell you the whole story. He meets Akira. And
we will kind of get to those devastating reveals later.
Yes.
I think that's a good kind of overview.
Yes.
Crazy post-apocalyptic Neo Tokyo, the two young teens who are trying to intervene, and then the one teenage girl who looks exactly like Kaneda.
Exactly like Kaneda. And there would be moments where I'm watching and I was like, how did Kaneda get that jacket on? That's not him.
That's not Kaneda.
Nope.
Yeah. And something that we'll kind of unpack is that around like, I'd say around 40 minutes into the movie, it's not uncommon for people who are watching Akira for the first time to kind of get a little overwhelmed by the many plot threads. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so there's a reason for that. And so before we dig into kind of some of the themes of this legendary movie, which has earned its status in every possible way, we're going to kind of talk about some of the production miracles behind it and why this really was a foundational historical thing. And so Akira itself, it was directed by Katsuhiro Otomo. Am I saying that right?
Otomo.
And he started as the mangaka for his series Akira, which was being published in, I believe, Young Jump Weekly, if I'm remembering that correctly. And so it's a bit of a Game of Thrones situation where the first volume or two were out, but he didn't finish the series in its sixth volume until, I believe, the early 1990s, maybe even 1990 itself. But so midway through, the film Akira was created, and the whole plot is kind of, it's the first half of the first volume and the last half of the sixth volume with kind of just like a hydraulic press of like some of these really important things in it. Like there's the old kind of like doom caller man who is on the palanquin that gets kind of like hauled around the city, who has maybe like 10 seconds of screen time in this.
Yeah, like 2 scenes.
But he is a unbelievably important character in the manga. He has his whole story. Same thing with the revolutionaries. I mean, a coup happens in the movie, and it happens in like maybe like 10 seconds. The colonel's just like, nope, government's mine now. Sorry, gang.
Like, yeah, that's the thing. They're like, hey, Colonel, you haven't done a very good job. We're going to need you to step down. And he's like, okay, but, and he looks around at the soldiers and is like, okay, but what if I don't?
Just shoot him.
Yeah, and all the soldiers are just like, that's a good point. What if he doesn't?
Whoa.
Yeah, whoa. Like, yeah, and then they just are like, okay.
He just says, in Japanese, he just says, ute. That just means shoot him. And he says, he says it so casually, ute.
Yeah, and the guy is just like, all right.
Yeah, he shoots one person and then coups over.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the oh my goodness, the I felt so sickened and shook by the depiction of firearms in this. Like, it's really brutal. And actually just kind of talking about this before we get too granular, Nona, when you first saw Akira, what was your kind of just immediate reaction to the movie?
You know, I really wish I could remember. I saw it so long ago, and I've watched it so many times since my first time that I can't remember my first immediate response. But if I were to guess, I've shown this, I've taught the anime class about 5 times now. So I've shown this 5 times to students, and many of them is their first time watching it. And I think the overwhelming reaction is confusion, because it is such a fast pace. The plot is so dense. There's so many different characters. I think that most people feel pretty confused when they first watch it. Odd as well, completely in awe of this amazing work of art that is Akira, but also confused. But I think that's why it merits a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th watch, right?
Oh yeah, I'm going to watch it again tonight.
I see new things every time I watch
Jessica,
it. I've watched it maybe 6 times now, and I see new things every time. It's pretty incredible.
I almost get overwhelmed by some of the group scenes in it, because the kind of, to bring a little of the granularity in, Akira is animated on the ones. So animation is often broken down into animated on ones and twos. So if you're animating on the ones, it kind of breaks down to being 24 frames a second. And if you're animating on the twos, it's effectively 12 frames per second. So like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is an interesting blend of these, where the city itself is animated on the ones, but the characters are, it's really good, but the characters are animated on the twos to give them that kind of like stop motion vibe. Shows like, or movies like Wallace and Gromit are all animated on the twos to have that kind of, great that just, it's aesthetic stilted walk. And something interesting I learned is that we're kind of past the era of all stop motion being like really physically manipulated granularly by individual artists, but that studio that makes those movies still animates and puts on like fake traces of fingerprints onto the models to kind of aesthetically emulate the sense that they're being touched and manipulated, which is just really cool to me. But so Akira is all animated on the ones, and it's because it had a unbelievable budget at the time, which is 8 to 11 billion yen, which was, I think, 10 times more than the last highest budget film in Japan, which was Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, animated at least, which, interestingly, what did you call Nausicaa?
Nausicaa.
There's a totally different name for it.
Yeah.
Nausicaa. Okay. And in America, it actually didn't debut as Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind. It debuted as Warriors of the Wind, because this was at a time where we didn't trust Japanese animation, and they added characters that literally didn't exist in the movie onto the poster wielding lightsabers to try to like make people watch it, and they cut like 20 minutes of time out.
What?
It's crazy. But Akira is animated all on the ones. Its frame rate is so buttery smooth that when I saw someone in the streets being torn apart by like the hail of gunfire, I think by the police or military, I felt so viscerally sick and upset by it.
Because it was the physics in it were unreal. I was like watching, and I was going to say the same thing. Because Nona, for you don't know this, I'm like a huge fight junkie. I love watching like fight scenes in like shonen and a lot of different anime. I just love watching animated combat. And for this, the physics behind the gunfire, behind like physical strikes, like when the biker gangs are fighting each other with pipes and things like that, or like punching each other, I'm like, ooh, ow. I couldn't help but feel the force behind each blow. And that, even with the hail of gunfire, like you said, like 100 shots rang out in maybe 3 seconds, and you saw each one hit, which for hand-drawn animation, that's unreal. That's unreal.
It's really incredible. That's why Akira has a place in anime history as well as art history, because it's the detail in this show is just absolutely incredible. There's actually a YouTube video that illustrates the many layers. I don't know if you guys have seen it. I showed it in my class, but that might be a good one to link to.
Okay.
Because it shows in a 6 seconds scene, it shows you the amount of sheer detail that went into drawing it is just absolutely incredible. And just for a point of reference, a show like Dragon Ball Z is 7 frames per second.
Oh, I believe that.
As opposed to the 24 of Akira. So that just gives you a sense of how much more detailed and smooth Akira is compared to pop culture anime.
If only every anime were composed of like 24 frames a second. Just the value would skyrocket. It would be
the value,
insane.
the stonks of it. It'd be like
way
GameStop value, just way up.
Yeah.
I think Tetsuo would beat Goku in a fight. I'm sorry to say that.
Tetsuo would annihilate him. Goku wouldn't even know what was happening.
Now, Nona, I want to ask, because a big thing here is always like subs versus dubs. I feel like it's less contentious nowadays because people are kind of just more like, watch what you'd like. But have you seen the movie both subtitled and with an English dub?
No, that's heresy. I have not. I do not watch anime in dub. And I think in my class, I was forced to show something dubbed once because there was just no other option. And I cut it from the class after that because I can't do it. I'm much more a fan of sub because there's so much you lose, so much that you lose in a dubbed.
So Nona, have you ever heard of the anime Ghost Stories?
I've heard of it, yeah. The Ghost. Wait, what'd you say?
Ghost Stories?
Ghost Stories? I think so.
Okay.
What?
If you hate English dubs and you want to have a bad time, definitely go check that out.
So to kind of explain why it's this legendary series where it happened once and never happened again. Essentially, the distribution company in Japan, the anime flopped worse than they thought it would, and they already had a distribution agreement. So they just told the dubbing studio in America, hey, just whatever you can do, not even to make a profit, just break even. I need you to get on.
This might be why I've heard of it.
Yeah, and so the whole voice team of really talented voice actors came in, and they got like a loose plot outline, but otherwise they all came into the studio every day and improvised the entire show. And it is so offensive. It is ridiculous. It's like watching a YouTube parody. It inspired a lot of these like fan dubs online, but that would be a good first up. but yeah, listeners, the doctor has spoken. The anime professor has issued the edict. Get away from dubs.
Get away from dubs. No more dubs.
Yeah. And in Akira, I think that's extra good advice because Akira was, and this is a weird thing to say, it was animated too well for dubs to even work with it. And what I mean by that is like normal anime. The way that the mouth flaps are animated is that they do the choreography and the storyboarding, they draw the scenes, and then the mouths are kind of filled in afterwards. So the voice actors match their mouth flaps to the mouth flaps that they add on, and they can get a little leeway of like redoing it. But in order for that to work, the heads need to remain really static, and so that you can kind of like zoom in on the mouth flaps. And that's why even some American dubs are of pretty high quality because they're doing a similar thing post hoc. But in Akira, all of the voice lines are recorded before the movie even started like getting fully produced, which is why you get this insane fidelity of their faces constantly like changing perspective and like lines and just corners on their face reacting to the words they're saying. And it's perfectly done because they're literally matching it flawlessly to the Japanese, but it makes it even more awkward when the English dub is forced on that.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah. And so with that, before we do kind of a talk about the themes, can you talk with us, Nona, about the influence of Akira in the West, like why it has become so legendary and foundational to the field as a whole?
Well, Akira really ushered in the second wave of anime in the West and had a huge impact on fandom and the Western and particularly American fan base. It was hugely kind of a cult favorite in the U.S. And because of that, if you listen to interviews of professors of anime now, many of them who were maybe young adults when Akira came out will say Akira was the impetus for me taking this life path. I mean, it really deeply impacted a lot of people. And so much so that in 1993, images from Akira actually appeared on a wall in Sarajevo as icons of political resistance. And that's really amazing if you stop to think of it, because in no other anime would it have been feasible or even comprehensible that an anime could carry such political weight. It's only from Akira, only since Akira, the anime could carry such political weight as to be shown on a site of such resistance and a symbol of resistance like that. So it's not just in the U.S. I mean, Akira was a worldwide sensation, and it also did a lot in Japan in the Japanese anime industry. The 1980s was kind of a low point in the Japanese anime industry, and Akira revitalized it. I mean, so it was very important abroad and in Japan. Hugely impactful.
When you look at anime now, do you ever like look at it and think, oh, that's probably influenced by Akira. Like having seen the film, having like taken a look at all the themes, and like, do you ever see films kind of being like, we'll take some of that, just cherry picking moments for themselves? Have you ever seen that?
Definitely, and not just in anime. Blade Runner, Matrix, Hollywood. I mean, any kind of cyberpunk dystopian film, I think, has something from Akira in it. I would go so far as to say that. It's hugely influential, not just in anime, but also in Hollywood.
That sounds absolutely right. Mm-hmm. Having seen it now and just like thinking about all the films that I loved, because I loved watching those films as a kid, like The Matrix, Blade Runner, all those. And having watched this, it really brought me back to being a kid and being like, whoa, this is the kind of thing that made me think like, oh my God, like this world is enormous. I don't need to see all of it. It's incredible. And I know it's there.
Yeah.
And so that's so cool that this film was sort of the impetus for all these other films succeeding later and creating that sense of awe in their audience. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of have this question for later about like where anime has headed since that I think will be one of the kind of the last things we touched on. But I think one of the ironies of and maybe mild tragedies is you were talking about these professors of anime who got into this, and I think that there was probably a sense that this is a new landmark in Japanese culture and animation from which things are only going to grow and progress, and imagine where we'll go from here. And yet between
we'll go to Moe.
Yeah, we'll go to Moe. And yeah.
How did that happen? I just don't know, but
we'll have to do a full episode on like the fall of anime, because like, we want to say Akira's influential, but there's no scene in it where Tetsuo grows breasts and becomes a cat girl. Like,
yeah.
and so it's very interesting following that. But so going from the influence to the kind of like deep dive, the conception of the future in Akira. So, you had shared something with me that is just, the story has literally lived in my head every day. I've thought about this since we last talked about, and I don't know if you're comfortable sharing it, but the old woman who had approached you, kind of thanking you by the war memorial, I think it was, or the bathhouse.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. So this was when I was in Japan, in college, actually. And I was in a bathhouse, in an onsen. So for those of you who don't know, Japanese do communal bathing. And I was just sitting on my little stool showering before getting into the communal tub. And this really old woman, her back was bent almost at a 90-degree angle. She must have been in her 90s, definitely born in the pre-war period. She came up to me and just bowed and was saying how grateful she was. And then she just picked up a sponge and started scrubbing my back while she talked about how grateful she was. And I think I talked about this in the context of dialects before. She was speaking in a pre-war dialect, and I could understand the gist of what she was saying, but I couldn't understand everything she was saying because it was such a different Japanese that she was speaking.
And when you describe this to me, at first I'm thinking like, oh, this is a mad person. Like what kind of psychosis is going on? I totally didn't understand why this was happening, but when you kind of told me the reason, it just collapsed my entire universe. It helped me understand everything so much more.
So during Japan in the late 30s and 40s, you have this building militarism, and everybody on board for this. In World War II, basically, you have starvation, poverty, orphan children was a huge problem. People, violence. Almost every family lost someone in the war. I mean, by the end of the war, the Japanese were so desperate that you have things like kamikaze pilots who are sent on suicide missions, which are tactically and practically extremely ineffective. But that's how desperate Japan was. All but 5 cities had been decimated by 1945 when Japan officially surrendered. So Japan was in ruins pretty much in 1945. And the way that the Japanese treated their colonizers in China, Korea, and other parts of Asia was brutal. It was extremely violent, lots of rape, lots of pillaging. It was very, very brutal. And so when the occupation began and the American occupiers started landing in Japan, they expected that same treatment. And that's not how it happened. And I'm not saying this in an American pride, like, yay, America kind of way, because there were other issues with the occupation.
It's the lowest possible bar to clear to.
There were other issues with the occupation, political issues, but the treatment of the populace, the Japanese populace, was very humane, for the most part, on the part of the occupiers. And that is something that I think people who were alive at the time were not expecting, and really left a deep, for some of them, obviously I can't speak for all of them, but left a deep sense of gratitude. And I think that woman, that's what she was expressing when she was thanking me in the bathhouse. We expected you to come rape, pillage, and murder. Instead, you handed out candy and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, you said that she had said when she was a girl, one of the GIs gave her candy, right?
Yeah, that's a common. There's a very famous image of that. If you Google search it, of a GI passing out candy, it's one of the iconic images of the occupation.
So
and again, I want to reiterate that there were other problems. It wasn't just this, easy, smooth transition that happened, but in that particular way, I think the occupation did leave Japanese citizens with a sense of gratitude, at least some, if not most.
Yeah, absolutely. So bouncing off of that, you previously described Japan as the first post-apocalyptic society. Mm-hmm. And I want you to kind of explain that concept to us, because that, I think, is critical to understanding Akira.
Well, Japan is the only country that has been the victim of not just one, but 2 nuclear bombs. The Japanese in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the ones who survived, are the only people on Earth who have witnessed their entire world, basically. I mean, not obviously it wasn't the world, but it was their world disintegrate in a flash, literally. Like near the epicenter, people just disintegrated. The flash was so bright. And so those are Nagasaki and Hiroshima are apocalyptic events in history. And Japan is the only country where that has survived 2 apocalyptic events. And so this is bound to have an impact on their narratives, their apocalyptic narratives that have come since World War II.
For sure. Hal, I see the gears turning.
Well, I mean, of course it would. Of course it would. Just looking at how, the U.S. responded to 9/11, that is something that we, never forget. That's something that we refer to again and again and again, because it was a tragedy. And so
Japan,
I guess
had to be like, what, 50,000 9/11s?
Just in 2 entire cities just gone, which is inconceivable to me personally. But with that kind of experience, of course it would affect their stories. Of course it would affect the way that they interact with the world afterwards. But I personally have never put that much thought into it, because it happened before my time. So it's very interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, I think the atomic bombs left an indelible mark on Japanese literature and culture and cinema.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so seeing the bombs going off at the beginning of the movie and then kind of bookending with this huge destruction, again, Dr. Carter has just dropped so many gems into my mind. And we're going to be far better at processing these things in the future. I hadn't considered that the idea of Western apocalypse narratives are so biblically inspired. It's all kind of like drawn from the Book of Revelations, that to see a movie that almost, gosh, I don't want to say like celebrates destruction, but it has a very interesting relationship.
It does, in a way, in a very grotesque way, celebrate destruction. I think, so Western apocalyptic narratives tend to focus on the fight between good and evil, right? And this all comes from Judeo-Christian mythology. It's all founded in that. So you typically will have a good character who makes a personal sacrifice at the end to save the world. That's I don't want to overgeneralize. Of course, there's a lot of variety as well, but that's typically the Western narrative, which again comes from the Judeo-Christian stories that we learn. But in Japan, you don't have that same Judeo-Christian foundation, and you have instead, for example, in Buddhism, in Japanese medieval Buddhism, you have the concept of mappo, which means, I think it's translated into English as the latter days of the law or something like that. But it's this notion of impermanence. And that notion of impermanence is really central to Japanese Buddhism and very important to Buddhist philosophy. So also in ancient Japanese literature, you see a literary element called aware, which is, it looks like aware if you write it out in English. But aware also celebrates impermanence. It's why the cherry blossoms are so special and so important in Japan. They only last 2 weeks. Okay, so this idea that everything ends, and that's beautiful. It's a very different foundation for understanding endings, right? So you have not only the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that are informing this narrative, but you also have Buddhism, concepts of impermanence, and even ancient literary aesthetics that celebrate the ending of things. And an ending implies a rebirth. So it's not just a negative thing. We think of apocalypse as a negative thing. Apocalypse is the end of the world. That's horrible, right? But in a Japanese context, it also implies reincarnation or rebirth as something else, hopefully. And in Akira, it's implied evolutionarily you get better. We evolve to be better, but not necessarily.
Yeah. That actually brings up a question that I wanted to ask you. Just given the Judeo-Christian belief of like the chosen one that will make a personal sacrifice to save the world, to save humanity, that usually is the protagonist. However, in Akira,
cool slang there, man.
the protag, I'm hip.
I'm cowabunga with it.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you, Nona, in your opinion, because to me, I'm not entirely sure, who's the protagonist in Akira?
So I would definitely say Tetsuo that's my opinion. Okay. I could see where there would be room for disagreement there. But because the interpretations that I find the most fascinating revolve around Tetsuo, when we talk about Akira as a story of teenage angst and of growing, as if we talk about Akira as evolution, if we talk about Akira as allegory for Japan, all of those different interpretive elements revolve around the character of Tetsuo. So I would say Tetsuo, but the reason that he doesn't jump out at you as the protagonist is because he's an anti-hero. He's not what we expect, right? We want our lovely little story wrapped in a box with a bow on it, and we want it all contained, and we want it all to be explained to us, right? And Akira is not that. It's a nihilistic mess, right? But we want the hero who we can latch onto as the good force in the film, and Tetsuo is not that. But I would say he probably is the protagonist, just not a very good, not a hero protagonist. He's an anti-hero protagonist. Yeah.
Right, and that was something I really loved about it, because I found myself, at first I was obviously rooting for Tetsuo. I was like, yeah, get him, Tetsuo, you got new power, you're gonna do some great things. You were like, yeah, to heck with those soldiers, goodbye. And then he was like, oh, my friends, gone. Oh, innocent people, them too. And I was like, oh, hang on. But it struck true to me, that felt more true, because I'm not gonna lie, when I was a little kid, when I was introduced to the concept of psychic powers in a science fiction novel and or film, I was like, oh yeah, I'd 100% flip a car at some point. Like, yeah, I would absolutely do something thoughtless like that if I could. But with a character that has that sort of internal angst and pain inside of them, and who suddenly is given this immense power in a period of days, and is not taught how to use them, is not given any sort of he's raised in a biker gang. Like, he's had a rough past. It all made sense why he would respond the way he did, to suddenly having no agency to being able to do anything he wanted. And to hell with everyone who wanted to get into his way. And so I thought that was, when I was watching, I was like, is Tetsuo the protagonist? I wasn't really sure, because at first I thought he was, but then I was like, oh, maybe he's the villain. But I guess what you are saying is that those two things aren't interchangeable. Like, you can be the protagonist and also sort of be a villain.
Yeah.
You know?
So what we're saying is,
I think you would really like some modern Japanese literature. I'll recommend some to you at the end.
Please!
Of it.
Oh, I'm so excited.
But if you are intrigued by this kind of villain protagonist, or not even, I don't know if villain's the right word, but the anti-hero protagonist, then you'll like some modern Japanese literature.
Oh, nice.
Oh man!
Such as Saw I'm a Spider, So What? Or the noble girl who wants to slim down her husband. I remember I'm such a pleb. I hadn't even considered Tetsuo as the protagonist. I guess I just wasn't thinking about it too much. But Kaneda does kind of suck. Like, he really, he's a dummy. He's a dum-dum. He's a
himbo for sure.
Yeah, like when he crashes the motorcycle just into the wall at the end, rather than like as an act of defiance.
Yeah, I'm sending him his bike, and I was like, you could have used that, but that's fine.
Yeah.
And then sure.
And then when he comes out for like the bazooka battle, I think that textually maybe the best reading of this is that like just part of Tetsuo did not want to kill Kaneda, really. Like, maybe I think there was kind of still playing this stuff out because he never really chose to like wave the hand and disintegrate. At least that's my reading at the end. But we talk about, what is Kaneda and Tetsuo represent, and I think that Kaneda feels like less rich in terms of some of the forces that you can attribute to him. I think that he is an interesting character that exists, but Tetsuo literally is acting so much out of pain and has such, for someone who chooses to, gank all of Neo Tokyo, he doesn't really have autonomy over himself. These forces are kind of so out of his control that as he's almost like possessed by like the sucker of this power, at the end, I mean, he literally turns into baby.
Yeah.
Like, he turns back into bebe after he becomes the giant.
Big bebe.
Yeah, after the metal kind of takes over and there's that kind of, body horror element, and then he turns into the giant testicle, but then his final form is Bebe. as he's screaming out for Kaneda to help him, and everything is new again. And so at this point, we're basically we're spoiling all of Akira, but I mean the kind of plot elements and the fact that it's this nihilistic thing, I think is so much less important than the pure visceral journey that it takes you through, because I don't think any details that we could talk about in the plot could really overwhelm just the impact that seeing this has.
That's the thing. We're describing the film, but we can't spoil the experience of you watching it. You're not going to be able to picture what we're telling you unless you've already seen the film.
Right.
Go watch the film.
Yeah, watch it numerous times.
Yes.
Absolutely. This could probably be, I wonder how many like hour-long podcast episodes you need to like really say everything there is to say about Akira. Because I would guess maybe 12 minimum. Like, I mean, and even then, I don't know. So talking about the titled character though, Akira. What is Akira? There gets to be a certain moment where you're just led to believe that this is some kid who's being kept in a freezer somewhere so he doesn't explode the city a second time. Mm-hmm. But what do you see when they finally bring out Akira?
So that's exactly what I was expecting. I was expecting, Tetsuo to open up the safe where Akira is being kept. And I'm like, well, it's kind of weird that he's being kept in a freezer, but I don't know, maybe psychic powers protect you from getting chilly? I don't know. And so like Tetsuo breaks it apart and he's looking in and he sees all these jars. And he's like, okay, what is this? And then the colonel comes out and he's like, yep, that's Akira right there. That's his brainstem. Those are his optical nerves. Might be his eardrums over there. I think that's his tummy. Yeah, we disassembled him after he blew up the city so that, future generations would be able to study him. But he did. He did. And Tetsuo's just like, oh, whatever, I guess. But it was like this moment of, I was expecting this enormous explosion to occur, like unleashing the ultimate evil, like you would in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. But no, it was just a bunch of jars with like nerves in them. And it was like it became clear to me that Akira was more, at least throughout the journey of the film, Akira was more of like an idea than he was an actual person. He was a person, yes, but the resistance movement that sparked up around the name Akira, how this Lord Akira would rise up and take back the city of New Tokyo, and not just take back the city of New Tokyo, but like cleanse it in a sacred flame, destroying all the non-believers and purifying the flesh. Basically, it was even the people who believed in that doctrine of like Lord Akira is going to come back and save us all. It wasn't like, hey, he's going to save us all and like we're going to live happily ever after. He's saying, no. He's going to wipe the slate clean, burned earth, nothing left, and that is better. And so to find out, it's just a bunch of brain pieces in some jars was actually almost more powerful, because I was like, that was a little letdown. And then it turns out that Tetsuo is like, then you're left with the question like, what was this all about? What is Tetsuo now? Is he Akira now? Just like all these different questions that pop up, and you don't get an answer. You don't. You have no idea what Akira is at the end. You just know that at some point he was a person. He had incredible psychic abilities. He taught the little baby grandpas how to use their psychic abilities, like sort of mentored them in that way. But
I think he was actually one of them.
Was he?
He was one of the ESPers.
But he was
their cohort, but for some reason, he had stronger innate abilities, and his powers took off and ended up destroying Tokyo. But he was one of their friends, and you see in a flashback near the end of the movie of them talking to him and remembering the facility where they were being trained to be ESPers.
Because he was the 28th of them, I think. Number 28 was, I think, his number.
Right. And the reason that the army took Tetsuo to begin with, the reason they took him was because they were like, he has some strong Latin abilities. Like, they put on their little power level scouters and they scanned him and they were like, oh my God, his power level's insane. And, and they did notice that, like, this whole time, one of the scientists is like referring to a sort of holographic image of what Akira's like brainwaves looked like. And that's sort of like a scale of what his power was. And then he's noticed like, hey, Tetsuo's looks kind of similar. It's not exactly the same, but it looks like it might become the same eventually. Let's just keep an eye on it.
And then they're like, let's keep an eye on it. Like with those scientists, it's like, whoa, it looks pretty Akira-ish. Like it's like,
but here's the thing. The Colonel does say, hey, can you control this? Is this going to be an issue? And I want you to tell me right now. And the doctor's just like, it'll be fine.
Trust me, bro. I just want to
keep an eye on him. And he's just like, okay, well, if it gets to be a problem, I want you to shoot him immediately. Kill him immediately. If you think at any point this could be an issue. I was just like, all right, Colonel, covering your tracks. Come on, you'd make it through a scary movie. Absolutely. Yeah. Colonel's not the one that like checks out the scary noises in the dark room or in the forest. He's the one that's like, yeah, I think I'm just going to leave and like call for backup. That is the Colonel. And like that was why they took him, because they thought like, he could be the next Akira, the one that leveled Tokyo 33 years ago. That's a good thing though, right? And everyone was just kind of like, okay, sure.
Yeah. I think that notion of uncontrollable power is really central to the film. And the idea that it's in our human nature. The scientist could have shut him down, but he didn't because of curiosity, a basic human trait, right? He wanted to learn more. He just couldn't, he couldn't shut him down because he was so curious and wanted to know more. So, I think there's definitely a critique here of human nature, and how our curiosity will be the end of us, right? I mean,
like Pandora's box.
Like we already said earlier in the podcast, Japan at this time is rapidly modernizing, rapidly advancing technologically and economically. So, you know, Otomo, is he sending a warning? You know, we can't let this power get out of our hands, right? Are we going to be able to stop it when it gets to be too much? Can we handle it? This was happening so fast in Japan that the transformation Japan is undergoing is very similar to the one that Tetsuo is undergoing in the film. I think you can definitely read this film as an allegory for Japan and a warning. Are we going to implode because we revel in this new power, this new place we have on the world stage, but we also fear it. And are we going to take it too far? You know? And the scientist, I think, is probably the best example of that warning that Otomo is sending.
Yeah, and yet what I like about the film is that it doesn't really offer answers or direct morals or something. It's really just like a reflection of the situation. And you mentioned cherry blossoms earlier, and it was just announced earlier this week in the BBC that Kyoto's cherry blossom season has peaked earlier than it has in 1,200 years. 1,200 years because of the sort of changing climate and encroaching endless ecological disasters. And this film isn't optimistic by any stretch, I would say. It's just kind of revealing the truth about the fact that some humans will still be left after whatever comes. The idea of the necessary step in evolution too. I'm not really sure even what to make of that on a grand scale. You know, if there's any way for us to evolve past something like this, or if we're always going to be forcing mass extinction events on ourselves.
Well, the way that it opens with the mass destruction and ends with one, I think implies that we are stuck in a cycle of mass destruction. But I think it has a very pessimistic implication there. But there is also a lot of discussion, especially in that scene where Kaneda and Kei are in jail. And he talks about the amoeba. That's probably the most important dialogue of the whole film. And there is discussion about evolution in that particular scene that also, I think, gives a slightly more optimistic take. And you can take it however you want, because, again, like you said, they're not telling us how to feel. They're not telling us the right way to interpret this. So on the one hand, you're stuck in this cycle of destruction and rebirth. And on the other hand, and there doesn't seem to be too much hope, because certainly Neo-Tokyo didn't get it any better than Tokyo. And then the next Tokyo, whatever that's going to be called, is implied that it won't get it right either, right? But you also have this underlying theme of evolution, and in evolution you evolve to become a stronger species, you evolve to survive better, right? So there is a little bit of room of interpretation for optimism, I think.
Yeah, and I think most of the main characters are left alive at the end of the movie, right? Miraculously, I think that both the general, Tetsuo, Kaneda Kei are all around, and
we're led to believe that the ESPers fly into this singularity, this explosion that is occurring around Tetsuo, and sucking him in as like Kaneda sucked into the explosion. Tetsuo's friend, I want to say Kairi. I don't think that's her name. That's a Kingdom Hearts thing. But like, there's this girl that Tetsuo was hanging around with in the beginning. It was clearly Kaori. Yeah. And she's like super sweet girl. She goes up to check on him. She's like the only one brave enough to go and like talk to him. And he kills her, accidentally kills her. And it's just like this horrible tragic, that broke my heart. But anyway, all these people are drawn into this mass extinction event, and the ESPers go in and they're like, okay, well, maybe if all three of us go in, we can help save some people. And so we're led to believe that that's what they do, and they join Tetsuo and Akira in this new state of existence, which seems to just be like as living energy back to like the conversation about the amoeba evolving into the fish and the reptile and the blah. It seems like all four of them entered this new state of existence as just pure energy.
Yeah, some people think it's like the birth of a new universe. There's different theories about what is.
Yeah, he said that too. He was like, "Am I witnessing the birth of a new universe?"
Yeah, and the fact that Akira never really left, that his spirit or energy, almost Dr. Manhattan style, still seems to be around. And I'm curious about the kind of like melancholic, I think like wabi-sabi is a really interesting Japanese concept that I enjoy about finding the beauty and flaws and impermanence. And I think that even exploring something like this, people who stopped the spread of Akira in American theaters further, or who had the opportunity to back it but declined, were George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. And both of them thought that this would not fly with an American audience. And I mean, in the era of streaming, so much has changed. You know what I mean? And so we're just not living in that world, and we'll never get an answer anymore. But I don't know, Nona, what do you think? Do you think it would have taken off, or would it have just been so despised by the normies that they would have never tried it again?
You mean if Akira had been released in a way for like general audience in the U.S.? Yeah. Well, I think it was set up to be a cult classic. So very, very popular among a certain group of people, not necessarily widely popular, because now it's very famous and it's very available to everyone who wants to watch it. And yet it's still a cult. I mean, it's still a pretty small group of people who watch it and enjoy it. So I think it's a little bit too weird, this structure of the apocalyptic narrative being a little bit too different than what we're used to, having an anti-hero he's not a villain or a hero. That would just be a little bit too weird for a general audience in the US, but I don't know, I could be wrong. It's also a very beautiful film. It's thought-provoking. It asks a lot of interesting questions. So I don't know. I could see it going either way, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, if Akira was so good, if it was just so incredible, why isn't there an Akira 2? Checkmate. Checkmate.
Oh my god. Oh, I'm so sickened by that. Oh my god. Jeez. So Nona, just a quick cap on the film, just sort of like. Yeah. We've talked about, the influences of this film, how it's really become its own sort of like cult classic nowadays. I think one thing we like to do at the end of each of our episodes, we typically, after reviewing a show, we're like, how did we feel at the end? And would we recommend it to other people? And I'm curious, because you've already told us a little bit about how it affected you, how it was sort of like an impetus for you, but now you can make all of your students watch it. So that's a great joy of being a teacher that not everyone recognizes, because I've worked as a teacher as well, is the joy of making your students watch the stuff you like or read the things you like.
Definitely, that's one of the best things about being a teacher of anime is I can just pick whichever ones I want to watch or that I like to talk about, and I have a platform and people who have to listen to me.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you could show like Akira just in 6 different like topics. You could like make them write 6 different essays about Akira, but they have to watch it every time just to make sure they
I can make them watch Akira every week and write a research paper on Akira every week for 14 weeks if I wanted to.
All right, hear that, guys? You better be on your best behavior, or you're going to know every line of Akira by the end of the month.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that, like, Nona would recommend this, but for me, yes. I mean, not everybody's going to get down with it. I was shocked because, like, I watched it with my father, brother, and sister. We watched it on my birthday, like, a month ago, and I was shocked that they all stayed awake through the whole thing. Just knowing who my father and brother are, especially, shout out you lunks. But they were both just like, my father. He's just this troglodyte from New York, and he was just like, yeah, that was some weird stuff, buddy. It was no Spider-Man in this one, right? Just bummer, man. And but it's fascinating. I'm not sure if watching Akira is a pleasant experience.
No.
Like,
no, it's not.
It and in America, the idea of not having a pleasant time going to the movie theater is seen as so anathema to what it's all about. But like, I can't think even of like a single Marvel movie that has ever been like, well, let's, make sure this isn't a high roll and, blast adventure. But even movies that just hit the theater have so many quick wisecracks and funny moments. And there are funny moments in Akira. There's a moment where like a disciplinarian teacher is just walking by the row of delinquents and just boom, just knocks each one of them in the face. That's darkly funny to me that he was just...
My teacher did
and every time
that.
he's like, discipline! Discipline!
My teacher did that to the 4th grade class I was in.
No way.
Yeah. Actually...
Did you...
if you didn't bring your homework, he would grab your cheek and then slap with a ruler the other cheek pretty hard. It hurt. But
wait, was the cheek just like to get a proper transfer of energy, like, or was that just like an extra, like, I'm going to do this to you too? Whack.
Pinch plus slap. He was an awesome teacher.
The double whammy.
He was a really awesome teacher. I don't know how you can do corporal punishment and still be so popular with the students and funny, and everybody loved him. So I'm not dissing on him, but he didn't do it to me. I forgot my homework once and he slapped everybody else and he wouldn't slap me. I think he kind of had an understanding that that's not how we do things in America. And I actually went home and I cried to my mom. I said, he slapped everyone but me. Why didn't he slap me? Because, I obviously did not fit in. And so in any little way that I could possibly fit in, I wanted to fit in. So my mom wrote him a note and said, please slap Nona.
Slap my daughter.
Please slap her as hard as you slap everyone else. And so then next...
Please hit my daughter with the roundhouse of justice, please. If you're giving out pile drivers, you got it.
Yeah.
So I did end up getting slapped eventually.
There you go. And thank God.
So again, to Dr. Carter's students, watch out.
Yes.
Watch out. She was raised on these streets, man.
Yeah,
so
she's going to give you the Oklahoma smash.
They are very lucky that it's virtual this semester, because...
I love that. So
man.
I think the note we wanted to end off on was kind of a question from earlier as we wrap up this discussion. Is so many people got into anime because it is because of Akira. It was just a fundamental thing that just blew up the industry in a way where I think that now maybe the next generation was often inspired by like Spirited Away and things like that. And so there's still many great films being made. And yet, the guy who, the gentleman who has produced our intro to the podcast, his name is Akira the Don, and his whole career in DJing and being a rap artist, actually, his whole moniker was inspired by watching Akira on a little VHS tape in England when he was a kid. He shipped to him, and it just completely changed his life. And this is a guy who's in his 40s now, and so many people have been inspired by this, and yet looking at the anime industry as a whole, especially the films that are there, it probably couldn't be more different broadly. So when you look at the fallout of like what the industry looks like, what do you think happened?
Oh boy. Well, as anime gets more and more globally popular, it also gets more commercialized, and the bottom line of commercialism is what sells. Right? The lowest common denominator. And maybe that's an overly negative way to state it, because I do have more recent anime that I really think are beautiful works of art. So I don't mean to be too negative on more recent anime, but I do believe that there is a selling to the lowest common denominator effect that's happening and really influencing the anime industry. So the films that you get in the late 80s, early 90s, can you imagine Neon Genesis Evangelion and those kind of deeply psychological themes? Now, I would have a hard time imagining Neon Genesis Evangelion being produced now, or even
Even
I
the
don't know.
pace of things, like Neon Genesis, the first 10 episodes are just kind of like plotting depression.
It's not universally likable. And Akira too, like you said, it is not a pleasurable experience necessarily to watch it. If you like it, and that's a big if, but if you do, you like it because of all the rich interpretations that are possible. You like it because it's food for your brain and it makes you think and it's beautiful. You don't necessarily like it because it was a good experience of watching it. Whereas that sort of thing, that sort of experience, I think just doesn't sell as well.
Well, hang on here. Now let's not be too critical of our audiences here. When it comes to, depressing plots, and having an unpleasant experience watching something. Look, I watched Earwig and the Witch.
Oh my
God. And I can tell you that it is still featured every day. And so I think we are really underestimating our audience here if we can watch a classic, iconic film like Earwig and the Witch. It's clearly
I was way more depressed by Earwig and the Witch than I was watching.
I could watch Akira 20 times consecutively. And I would still have more fun than watching Earwig and the Witch once.
Watching Earwig and the Witch has me praying for Lord Akira's return
to just cleanse the earth and purify my body in a sacred flame. That's what I crave when I'm watching Earwig.
So that's an example of something that's not doing so well, and still Mr. Goro Miyazaki has not had a hit. My headcanon is that his father is deliberately wrecking him every time, or has a whole litany of different sabotages set up for his son. It's just my headcanon. I know it's probably not true, but I don't understand how he can be
maybe Hayao Miyazaki writes out the loose plot and then just hands it to him and says why don't you freshen that up for me? Why don't you just see what you can do with that? And it's just every time he's like
So Nona, we agree that not everything is heading in a direction that is completely palatable, and in the kind of chase to be liked by everybody, oftentimes these things are liked by few people, or it has become so riddled with hyper-expressionism that, as Hayao Miyazaki once said, anime is a mistake. And so, What do you think are some things that are doing a good job of it? Things where you go, this is a recent movie I love, or this was a series that really hit for me. What are some of those standouts for you that we could pass along to the audience?
That's a good question. A more recent film that I really liked. Well, it was 2016. I liked Your Name. I think that Makoto Shinkai is really really beautiful animator. He animates especially water, but nature, water, familial relations in a very beautiful way. I think you can't even compare it with Akira. It's just right. To call them both anime, it's only because they are both drawn. There's really no other connection there. But there are. I like all of Shinkai's works. I wasn't a huge fan of his most recent one, the one about the weather. What is it in English? The weathering with you. Yes, I wasn't a huge fan of that. Talk about commercialism on steroids. Have you guys seen that?
I haven't.
And I totally agree that the plots are kind of the weak elements there, and even Your Name is gorgeous to look at. It's one of the shiniest things I ever don't see, but it's very saccharine in its approach to things.
Yes.
So I'm so sorry. There was something that you just hit on with Your Name. I'm totally blanking out the thing that came into my head. This is definitely something I'm going to cut. Hal, any other questions?
No.
Weathering with You, just so you guys know, is like a big commercial. It's just product placement for a solid hour and 30 minutes. So whatever enjoyment you get from the plot, which I think isn't overdone.
Just watch cable.
They're kind of overdone. It's like he takes a bite of a McDonald's Big Mac and says it's the best meal I've ever had. Oh my God, how much did McDonald's pay you to do that? But it's not just that. You get product. It's just product placement, and that's kind of indicative of the industry, the way that the industry has gone. It's money making commercialism. Not to say that there's not good stuff out there, but that example popped up in my mind as a pretty good example of what I'm talking about.
Totally.
Okay. That's good. I mean, it's something that we are definitely looking into. We really want to like find new series to watch, new manga to read, because I can only watch Food Wars on repeat so many times.
But it's hard because our audience will grow to the expectations that you set for them, and if you don't expect more from your art, you'll kind of keep. It's not going to be made better. It's not going to be made more interesting unless you yourself kind of have some higher standards for this stuff. And you mentioned that they're both drawn before, and that's their main similarity. This is actually maybe something to leave off on, or we'll include it as a bonus question here, but our last episode was talking about the first animations ever in Japan. So from the kind of like clip art days and the initial like little looping animation that was found in like 1917, all the way to Astro Boy talking about early anime. What is anime?
That is a really good question. And it's actually how I opened my class. What is anime? It's a very hard question to ask. Some people would say it's Japanese animation. But then you have Tekkon Kinkri, which if you haven't seen it, that's a fantastic film. And it's directed by Michael Arias, who's American, Japanese studio, Japanese directed in Japan. Everything about it is Japanese except for the ethnicity of the director was American. So I'll show a video clip of something that looks like anime, this nebulous thing called anime, and I'll say, is this anime? And students will all say yes, because it's a typical big eyes. It looks really Japanese anime. It's made in the United Arab Emirates. So is anime a style? Is it something you look at and you say, oh yeah, that looks like anime, as opposed to Disney, for example? There's different artistic styles. Or is anime defined by its Japaneseness? Is anime Japanese animation? Now, what if, we have the super flat animation? Doesn't look at all like anime, but it's from Japan. So if you want to take that definition, is super flat anime, and it just gets very complicated to define what is anime. I don't have an answer for you, is the short answer to what I'm trying to say.
No, good. No, that was ours as well.
Yeah, no. That's about what we thought, which is why I'm so excited for us to join your next lecture for your students. I'm really excited. PAX has a great preamble for the students when we open up the class with you.
Right, about, hey everybody, this is why Vegeta is a trans mask icon. This is why G Fuel must be the core of your diet. Brotakus taking over today. Yeah.
Well, next Monday I'm showing End of Evangelion, the movie, and we're talking about the Evangelion series. So if you guys want to come to class, you are welcome to join me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much.
Trippy. It will be very trippy.
We really can jump in.
Oh, sure.
It's like Christmas. Oh, this is so
I'm doing it. Oh, I'm so excited.
Well, and so with that, I already feel like we've been brought to school today by you, Dr. Carter. This has been fantastic. And I think that this, more than anything, shows why anime, if you're a young kid and all you're watching is My Hero and ReZero and, those both rhymed. And some of these recent shows, there's so much to love about it, and Hal's definition for anime last time was, it's just something that sparks joy inside. And I think that's as close, as good an answer as any. But this just goes to show why there are people, why it's worth having a class on. You know what I mean? Yeah. Why it's worth teaching and examining. And I think that no animated art form really explores these different just dreamscapes and possibilities and the pure just gorgeous experimentation of animation like anime and specifically Akira. And that's why I think that this episode has been such a foundation shaking thing for me to get to talk about. I mean, there are things we haven't even touched on, like we didn't touch upon Japanese collectivism or like I
didn't even get to to talk about the Tokyo Olympics.
Oh, right. That was like a main plot point.
Yes, and now it might be getting
No, it's okay.
now it might be getting canceled
It's
again.
okay.
Oh,
There's just
no.
there's so much.
Yeah.
But Dr. Carter, you know, we gotta, if we can, have you on again for something
Yes,
like Paranoia
please,
Agent or just to
please.
talk. But like, this has been unbelievable. I know people are
Unreal.
gonna love it.
Well, thank you guys so much for inviting me. I had a lot of fun.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
This
you.
was such a treat for us. And as soon as we, you know, knew this was a possibility, we freaked out. And so, so thank you so much, Nona, for your time, for your expertise, and for sharing a little bit of your life with us. You know, we loved it, and we know that everyone who listens is going to absolutely love it. So thank you. And I will definitely be seeing you on Monday.
Okay. Email me for the link, for the class link.
I will. Thank
Will
you.
do.
Okay.
So I think that's a good time to bring us all out.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Everyone, thank you all so much for listening and joining us
thank
today.
you.
If you liked what you heard, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or review us on your favorite podcasting app. It really does make a difference, and every review counts. And we'll make sure to give you a shout out on the air to show our appreciation. Again, Nona, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And with
Thank
that,
you so much for having me.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And with that, I'm going to say, I'm Hal.
I'm Pax.
And we're the Brotakus. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you later.
See you later, y'all.